episode 11, Coach Conversation. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Another week down. Feeling the buzz when we heard the news that things might return to some sort of normality. I mean, the coaches' faces during the week, even though they didn't have an absolute time, like some of the coaches that are in private schools or like the kind of sport angle of those schools are back next week. So they were like, oh gosh, what's going to happen? The ones that had a couple of weeks till the end of March were like, we're going back. I'm going back. It's going back. It's happening. And then other coaches who'd been still coaching away kind of have, I guess, a little bit more normality coming back in. There's less Zooms going to happen and more kind of contact on the ground stuff. So yeah, lots of going on. Very exciting week.
Yeah, I mean, it's even nice. Some of the coaches that I've spoken to at the club this week, just to talk about, like, well, this is stuff that we're going to do when we get back on the grass. It's like, ooh, nice. How are we going to do that?
And how has that been? Like, how long is it since you went into that role?
Well, we did. There was a couple of sessions over Christmas that took place.
Right.
But obviously, we've not had anything since then. So it's been, well, where are we at now? End of Feb. So we've had pretty much nearly 8 weeks of nothing.
Oh my goodness. Is that just managing like over Zoom or like meeting people, getting faces to names and stuff?
Yeah. So just conversations with coaches this week. So I had a good conversation with the under 14s coach about what he does, how he does it, his views on coaching, how long he's been coaching, where he wants to take his coaching, how can I support him? So yeah, we've had some good conversations.
Wow. I think you said that so quickly that maybe people who don't get that kind of support would not appreciate or would appreciate something like that in their world. Like, I don't know how many people have somebody like you in a role saying, how can I support you? I think that's really important, isn't it? Going into a new place, whatever role that you have, to sit down with a co-coach or to sit down with somebody in the environment and ask them how they're doing, how they do things, what they see,
Yeah, absolutely. And so I watched about 40 minutes of a session that he delivered in that Christmas bit. So I had some views based upon what I saw there, but I'm really intrigued to think, right, well, where does he need support and what his view is? And I said to him that, we'll ask the players what they think as well. And it was like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds good. So I was like, all right, awesome. So we'll get my view, his view, the kids' view, and we'll start to kind of piece it all together into a plan for him as a coach, but we will do the same for the kids, like we talked about on our IDP episode.
I was going to say episode 9 IDP.
Exactly, episode 9.
Plan it out. Oh, yeah. No, that's brilliant. So I guess nice segue into practice. We talked a little bit last week, some of the step model, some surface kind of considerations, although they can go pretty deep. I think we just kind of skimmed over a nice reminder when people are getting back on the ground, the different areas to focus on. Is there anything lingering that you think we need to dive into for, maybe the early part of this episode?
Yeah, I had a few thoughts since the episode, and probably like you, we finished these and I'm like, oh man, I should have talked about this and we got that and we could have gone here and kind of, all of these kind of things that we could have done. And I definitely had that sense of, we've just touched the surface on it. And we didn't really get into thinking about, well, you change the space, what's the psychological impact on a kid? We didn't really get into the depth of that, but hopefully we gave people enough of a hint to say, look, if you play around with the space, the task / time, the equipment and the people, the impact on the person is something to consider. So, but yeah, that was something that was kind of in my head. But then it was the layers of bits that kind of go on top around the practice design about, well, how do the principles of how you want to play the game impact on the practice, the practices that you put on, and the competitions, and how you approach match day or competition? Because I'm very much of the view that in that kind of development years, match day is just an extension of learning. It's the chance to put into practice some of the stuff that you might have been working on that week. And then a bit on the individual needs, but and then some of the kind of, well, what happens if you change some of the conditions and what you're looking for? So yeah, my head went all over the place.
Yeah, no, and it's easy. I think it's easy for us to to bring some stuff to the surface, but it is again going back to unpicking the smaller parts of that. And I think, I don't know what episode it was where we talked about, you know, keeping your finger on the pulse, checking into the session, the pace of the session. Then we went on to the transitions. But if we rewind to that and think about, like, say, even the considerations in the session, I'm not ever frightened of going off piece, going off plan. But I think what's important for me anyway, and has been over the years, is to know, like, what's informing my session.
Yeah.
And then when I have that together, so say it's a stage in a season where we've had a game, easy one, looking at the stats, looking at the video, thinking about what's coming up, thinking about how everybody played, getting all the feedback from players and coaches to inform where we think we need to go in the next session. And then how much time we prioritize to different things. So, you know, there is a lot of time and consideration around the block and variable stuff that we touched on briefly at the end of the last session. But where is that relevant? How do we know how measurable is that around impact? And like you again touched on there, there's a psychological impact of that. So there's the ripple effect of, well, I'm doing this for this purpose, and actually I've noticed 2 or 3 things over there, and I've noticed a couple of things. And I remember, side note, but I'll come back to you on this. A couple of years ago, I was coaching in a school, and there was another coach coaching another team after me, but our practices used to overlap, so we'd watch each other's. And he came to me at the end of a session and he said, you know what, like, an athlete cried at the end of a session, 15, 16 age group, you know, and I'm really concerned that I did it. You know, I'm really concerned that I've pushed. And he's definitely not autocratic, but he wasn't even a very vocal coach. And we just unpicked what had happened. And it's it's a great example of just what you've said there. He changed a number of different things in the practice in the previous session. And the athlete just got to that threshold, just got to whatever she was able to cope with in that space. And we talked about, like, what kind of character she was before that session, what he'd noticed in the previous months, considerations for all the stuff happening outside, had he had a check-in with her, you know, and a number of things. But the depth he went to on that athlete, the concern around the care part of it, when actually from a kind of a resilience point of view, there was a little bit of a realization that she'd reached something that she couldn't get over. So, you know, at that point, the conclusion at that exact moment, and I'm sure he's unpicked it since, was that he maybe gave her a lot of rope to play with in a session. When we talk about kind of the variability or the random side of it, that yes, it was brilliant and he kept building on different parts of the exercise, and they did too, but she got to a point where, you know, the cognitive load was too much for her. So it's really interesting. I know I segued slightly, but you just brought up so many brilliant things together. I was like, how do we portion in the reflection time for that consideration? What are we noticing during the session, and how do we balance what we thought the impact would be or the outcome to what we were? So there's no particular question, but your thoughts on any of that? Or
yeah, my thoughts are, wow, that's so important, but quite hard. You know, to recognize the impact of, by changing something, this is the impact on an individual. And it's how maybe you can find strategies and ways to help the kids or the players or whoever you're working with kind of articulate that. So, you know, do you do a practice for 15 minutes, change some constraints, do it for another 15 minutes, and then have 5 minutes with the kids where all the players that they can write on some whiteboards and talk about the differences between the 2 practices and how it made them feel, or find a way that they can speak to each other. And they don't even necessarily have to feed it back, but I can certainly remember doing a practice with the kids. This was in my kind of academy coaching days, and we were doing a big area, and we changed it, went to a small area. And this kid at 10 years old, he was 5'9". Like, no, he was going to be a big kid. His brother was 6'8" on a scholarship playing basketball, right? He's going to be big. Wow. But we were on the big pitch. He was great because, you know, 2 strides and he solved the problem. As soon as we put him on a little pitch, he couldn't cope because he couldn't turn quickly. He didn't have very fast feet. So we had all sorts of different challenges. And he went from best in the group to worst in the group because I changed the space in the practice. Now, the impact on that lad was quite stark, but finding that strategy to allow him to share that, to inform my coaching, I think is probably quite an important thing to do, because it's hard to notice them all, but definitely finding strategies to draw that out of the people doing the practice is important.
Yeah, it is really important. And I was thinking as you were talking there about like what I think, again, can't remember what episode we said it in, but like the check-in at the end of the session and moving from the recall side of things to the evaluation of, even if it's peer evaluation or you're checking in around your own personal, how was I received in the session? What did you find hard? The check-in part, and less of the, what did you learn here? And can you repeat that? And how important it is to give that time at the end of a session. But linking back to, I guess, the design of a session, is there something in the thought process, say the session could be, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and we can get to time again, since we didn't get to it in meaty forms last week. Is there an optimum time you would spend on an activity and the progressions of it? And also, is there something that you think is useful to have as a continuity or consistency throughout a session in some part of it?
Yeah, great question. I think it varies from sport to sport, and also probably from age and stage of development as well. So I know if I'm working with my son and their rugby group, we need 4 or 5, we tend to be in an hour and 10-minute session. We need 4 or 5 practices that the kids will move through, whether it's on a carousel or just, right, we're doing this, now we're going to this, then we're going to this, just to kind of keep them focused and on task quickly enough. But that will change based upon the age and stage of the kids. So you might have one practice that the kids are flying with. So you can leave it running for 5-6 minutes, just play around with some individual challenges. It doesn't have to be an entirely different practice. Or you'll have times when the practice just doesn't work. But again, like you said, sometimes you have to go off piece. Sometimes you just go, right, okay, this isn't just quite working today. Let's flip it up and we'll go and do something different. Yeah. But again, this is where that kind of practice design for me, I think, fits in. I'm very handy today. I don't know why. I'm lots of hands.
I'll start using mine, make you feel better.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Weird. I'm just going to sit on them. How then, how does your practice fit into a block of work?
Yeah.
Because what I tend to experience more from children and young people's coaching is what happened in the game, the match, the whatever they did, the competitive bit on a Saturday or Sunday basically affects what happens in training that week. As opposed to, right, we've got a scheme of work or a curriculum that we know the kids need to work through and develop and get better at over time, because they might be whatever age, and we know that they've got a long way to go yet. But I used to see it all the time, right? We conceded 3 goals from corners at the weekend. So what do we do at practice that week? Defending corners. That is what tends to happen. But yeah, that practice design, I think you can change it up and down within the session based upon the needs of the group in front of you. But don't stray too far from a long-term plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the kind of conversations prior to the last 12 months, but actually interesting when coaches are not coaching as much, they've looked at their periodization or their cycles and the blocks. If a coach in the swimming world has a 12-week block that they might be looking to plan within, there's always the constraints that happen in between. There's always something that will inform part of the following session, but that usually comes in the form of a conversation and less tweaking of the set. I've seen coaches, have a set ready, have the intro check-in with all the athletes, explain what's happening, and vibe something from that conversation and just go, actually, we'll move from this set. We'll keep, the warm-up in, we'll keep this, but I'm going to tweak, maybe take it a little bit off the end. Or I think in an invasion sport side of things, I do look back on my early days of coaching and think, oh, we were really poor against a zone defense at the weekend. Let's look at that. And now I look back and kind of go, how naive in a way, because although we, it was always like the sticky tape, just fixing things week in, week out, and we'd have a long-term plan, but the pressures of performing and winning tended to come in and go, oh, I'll just spend 10 minutes on this and we'll just have a look at that, instead of letting the athletes in the early days problem solve themselves. Now, some stages of coaching, they needed more information about the sport. They may have come from, a school basketball side of things into a club system. But yeah, it's really interesting. I think the constant part of that would be that there is space for adaptation and there is space to adjust and adapt. But you have your overall plan that you're tweaking and developing as you go along with the athlete. Yeah. It's really interesting. And the other thing there you mentioned that again kind of sparks something off around constraints is like always having some sort of constraint in the session, as in, like you are going to tweak each activity as you go along, or they're going to adapt it and adjust it, but to just be mindful of that. Just be mindful of, the space that you're operating in, the environment that you have, and how you can tweak those to have an impact. And I don't know why at the moment, but shooting's coming into my head. So, the shooting world, where they might spend hours getting the feel, their feet and their feet position, and trying to maneuver then to take, 20 shots and then reset again, and then another 20, and how, variability and different like auditory kind of challenges could come into that as well. Anyway, rambling on that, but yeah, just sparked off this topic could get you going in any direction.
So what I think we should do is, because again, I think there's more going off in my head now about the whole practice, like, do we start with an unopposed drill and then we put in a cone and then we add a defender and then we go to a game? Or do we start with a game and then break it? I think that's a whole separate conversation. But I wanted to kind of pick up on something that you talked about there, which linked into something that you saw this week. So when you talked about that kind of linking things together and the impact of winning and how that used to affect things, tell us about the piece that you picked up this week on Twitter that kind of informed a bit of discussion. We can kind of discuss some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a screenshot because I knew it would be useful for us to discuss it. And it did get me thinking about my own journey and how often I look back at the coaches that I've had and, celebrate their efforts. But Rachel Hooper she retweeted from Cal Jones, who had a great thread on elite coaches. And there was a couple of different angles he was going off on. But the Rachel Hooper part was, we need to be less interested in what a coach has achieved and more concerned with how they have achieved it. We spoke on Curious Coaches Club, UK Coaching during the year, about Athlete Day. And I know that there's a massive appreciation for all that area. But in a kind of a more surface area at the moment, I just thought, isn't it interesting that some sports really value that chain, where if somebody does win at an Olympics, that there's a mention for the whole chain of coaches that they've come through, and other sports don't do that. But then why I screenshotted that, I was like, okay, so if we could discuss today the value of success. We work in, we see coaches all the time under pressure for performance, under pressure to get funding in, under pressure to say they're doing fantastic and their well-being is great and everything motor on. So I'm just kind of a lot of things floating around in my head there about coaches who have had time to pause and think about why they're coaching, thinking that they're into the development of the person, but actually trying to grapple with that performance and participation in their head, or the development and the performance element. So yeah, that was my screenshot for us this week.
Okay, so if an athlete or a team that a coach is working with wins Olympic gold or wins a league title or whatever the sport is, competition or tournament, does that make them a good coach?
Not automatically in my head, no.
Okay, go on, tell me more.
I just don't think I know enough about it. I've been fortunate in the last couple of years to meet more and more Olympic coaches for sit-down conversations. And they are lovely people who've worked really, really tirelessly in their, in their role, in their vocation as a coach. But I wouldn't say all of what they speak about exhibits great coaching. But I'm not there for the endless amount of training sessions that they've had. I just think listening to them and listening to what they've done and how sure they are that certain ways were the only way instead of any way, it would, and I have been, Jeannie, loads of different coaches popping into my head there. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I have witnessed different coaches who other coaches will say, oh my, when you see this guy, amazing. Oh my goodness. And I'll stand there and I listen to how they speak to the athletes, my way or the highway, but because they've got this association with an elite level or elite athletes or previous success, prior success, the other coaches are somewhat in awe of and don't question. And I think that's, a snippet. But I've had, so that's a snippet for now. Yeah.
I haven't read one for a while, but there was quite a lot of academic papers around kind of great coaches or serial winning coaches, and they would break down what it was about them as a coach that made them a serial winning coach. And the coaches that they chose, they worked for 10 years at the top level, etc. But I think it's really interesting that, just because you work at the top level, does that mean nobody else is a great coach? Or should we be looking at trying to break down what a high performing coach is, regardless of where they work? You could be working with 6, 7, 8-year-old kids at a local grassroots club in any sport, but you could still be a high performing coach.
Yeah. I mean, like for me, why I think one of the days when we do one of the episodes, I really just want to unpick the role that you're in at the moment, in the new role, the football role, because I think they're really lucky to have that. I think they're, it's very rare that we see in other sports somebody to oversee the entire not the pathway within that club, like the grassroots coaches. And that's why I said earlier on, like the value of somebody having a conversation about their coaching with them, instead of the conveyor belt of you're in, you set up, you go through the session, you listen to some webinars, you inform yourself and do your very best job in the rain, Sunday morning, losing games, winning games, nature of sport. But the conversations that coach is having with, maybe at home, the frustration after a game, like all of those little, peaks and troughs of sport are part of the journey that makes up that amazing person. But sometimes it's overshadowed by the age or level that they're at. That person might not get a spotlight. And, I just think it's interesting that you have coaches who are maybe, so there was another guy I met a few years ago who was an Olympian, really decorated now, loads and loads of medals, and went straight into the coaching world after that. And he thought, well, this is a natural progression. I'll take this over, get a few bob on the side. And he said, when we were having a coffee one day, he said, they gave me some really great athletes to work with, and those athletes are really successful. And he said, and I was like, at the start, I was like, wow, that's, brilliant. And he goes, no, not brilliant, not brilliant. He said, brilliant for that year because I thought I was the bee's knees. I don't actually know what that term means, but I have to think about that, the bee's knees. And he said the following year, I had athletes who were in participation a little bit more down the pathway or down, to the early enjoyable social stages. He said, I couldn't break down the sport. He said, I'd been so far gone and the, train, precision on this, the refining of everything, that I had to go out and just kind of unpick everything I was doing, get the right language and go along that. Now that was just an aside example of, it's so easy for high profile athletes to be put in those positions and to be maybe directed that way to, I don't know if people think they're being supportive at the time and they go there, not having fully closed off their athletic career in their mind and that transition into this role, athletes in front of them that are almost ready-made. And then it kind of builds from there.
Yeah. It's a real challenge, isn't it, that kind of athlete to coach transition? And we've discussed it on other things before as well. But you're right. I don't think that would make that guy or girl, whoever it was, a great coach. but people may consider them to be a great coach because their athletes have done well, which is weird, really.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to dive into. And I think it gives more of the people that we recognize on a daily basis who don't, because there's so few coaches that do get to Olympic level, and a lot of coaches that aspire to get there. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't aspire, and we shouldn't have people really ambitious to get to that stage in their career. But it's that cliched journey part that's so important. The journey, what you are on and why you're doing what you do, and revisiting that, and owning that journey. So many athletes write books about their journey now, because some look back and think, I wish I'd have valued that journey a little bit more. I'd like to hear from more coaches on that in the book world. But yeah, does that go back then to why people get into coaching in the first place? And are we weighting too much value on people who've gotten to that stage? And is that maybe glossed over? And I'm not going to go fully down the mental health route, but is that glossed over to think you got all that way there and you're still shining and you're still producing more athletes, when actually we don't know the real story of what the journey's been like for either party?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we were talking at the club last week about what success looked like for us, and I said I will never speak to them on a Sunday and ask them the score. Like, if you want to tell me the score of the game of who won or who lost, brilliant. But the aim ultimately of all the youth teams is to try and get some players through into the first team. And I said that's what I'm more interested in. That's an individual thing, because what you never get like an entire group of under 18s or under 21s in my world become the first team. Like that, that transition doesn't happen. You might get a couple through because you're an individual but playing within a team sport setting. And I said to him, that's what I'm interested in, is what individual people you get through, and that's what success looks like. But for us at the moment, success post-COVID is that all the kids come back. That's success. Who cares on where you finished in the league or whatever? It's absolutely irrelevant. Just get everybody back and enjoying themselves and reconnecting. That's the first stage of what success looks like for me there.
Wow, that's a great message. That's a really great message. And I think if there are coaches that are listening and they're in the performance end where results do matter, or the pressure from above is coming down, then it is to just be mindful of, if you do have to get all those results, that the athletes are on that same mindset and same journey, and that you're celebrating the little wins along the way. Those are
although saying this, I did get a very good reminder from my dad. So the first team that are playing at semi-professional level, and I said to my dad, we've got some new dugouts have gone in, and I said it looks really smart. And he went, well, a new dugout won't get you 3 points. So it was a very fair point made by my father, that was look, just going to drop that there, just to say,
thanks, Dad.
Might look pretty, but it doesn't get you 3 points. Yeah, and they're not going to win you more football matches. I'm like, no, you're probably right, they won't do. But they're more comfortable than the ones before.
Yes, and if I feel good, there's a possibility that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Although interestingly, so just as an entire aside, trying to gain that performance advantage, and I think back to days of previous football managers that did all sorts of random things. Should we have left the away team dugout an absolute wreck and made it as uncomfortable as possible to try and gain a performance advantage compared to us?
Well, I work with, funny, I'm laughing
you
out.
Didn't?
Yeah, well, I work with a Gaelic football team, and they are just, absolutely fantastic. A group of 30 lads. Well, there's an intermediate team there as well, so 55 in total. And, they're up in a clubhouse that constantly gets support and needs more work, but they're constantly trying to, keep everything going. And they have been brilliant in the last year. They've had a lot of results success. So they've worked really, really hard in the last, 2, 5, 3 years, however long I've been involved in different capacity with them. But there have been conversations that I've had to reel them in on where they say, well, they can have the outhouse, they can have the one over there, or I don't care if the toilets are working. And I'll be like, Can we just check in with that? We do care. We do need them to have showers. We do need food. Tell them to come down. They can have food, you know. And it's that kind of funny mentality that you get from an odd few committee members or a few locals who are so passionate about the badge. You know, they'd be like, no, leave them out there now. Don't give them any car park spaces. You know, but like, you know, it's the camaraderie that's there after the game, the meeting at the clubhouse, and there's the chef doing all the food for them or whatever. And it's a real reminder of sport and the community of sport that's there, and that vehicle for rich conversation. You have 100 guys after a Saturday game or a Sunday game sitting down, win, lose or draw, apart from the few people who are a bit sour, but yeah, I've heard that before, made me giggle. But so they have perfect changing rooms for both now. Or when they're in awful state, they're in awful state for both. So nobody's winning. But the reminder that I was going to say there when you were talking about that last comment about progression, I remember one of my proudest moments as a coach. And it wasn't celebrated publicly, but it was, I was working in a school and I had a group of athletes who basketball wasn't, I think we may have spoke about this before, basketball wasn't the number one sport. I was taken over from a friend who had been coaching in there, and I just came in. They were in a development league. It was participation, and the school wanted them to have some extracurricular stuff. That's the kind of setting. And 3 years later, so there's a local club, which is the club that I was part of, which had everything you needed, had all your kit, bells and whistles, great coaches, fabulous gym, as close to the American style gym and bleachers as you could get, and a real like games every Saturday night, Americans coming over to play with us, all this. And I remember when I started getting in, there was one or two girls who said, oh, I'd love to play for the Wildcats. And some of the other girls were like, no, that's not going to happen. Like, you could barely bounce a ball, girl, you know. And 3 years later, she was playing with the under-18 team. And, you know, the intimidation of going from the school she was in to the club, which was based in this other school, then being accepted into a group that had predominantly the majority of that. But like, she did really well. She got international trials. It wasn't even about that. It was the confidence she'd gotten from sport and how much she'd improved at the sport to go there. You know, those kind of things. I don't know why that sparked into my head there, but it's part of the journey, I guess, that you at the time, you know. Yeah.
More to unravel next week.
Yes, gosh, loads. We've chopped and changed there. So Twitter, follow us on Twitter, or at least give us an email and tell us what's going on. There's loads of different topics coming in and out. A new exciting topic coming up next week. So we've got @Coach Convo on Twitter. Follow us, add your comments there, review, let us know what you think of the episode, or coachconversation@gmail.com. You can find the link below. Thanks for joining us. Episode 11. Peace out, everybody. Have a great week. Bye.